Wonderful, welcome. Well, I think we'll go ahead, Emily, and start this morning on our session for creating value, mitigating risk, and tackling food system externalities. Thanks to all that have joined us. Next slide, please, Emily. It's really nice to have you all with us. I'm Diane Holdorf. I'll be hosting our session here today. I lead our food and nature work at WBCSD. Now I'd like to introduce the speakers that you'll be hearing from today. We've got a great lineup, and so I'm thrilled to have them all here with us. Each of them will do a brief introduction when they start their section, but we've got Scarlett Benson with us from Systema Q, Rodney from the who leads our Redefining Value team here at WBCSD, Emily Grady, who leads the work on True Value of Food in our team of Fresh at WBCSD. We have Ria Bakshi and Ravi Abhivardhana from OLAM, Clea Kaska-Cook from WBCSD, and then we're really pleased also to have Martin Frick, to have Martin Frick with us, who's the now appointed Deputy Envoy for the 2021 Food Systems Summit. So a great lineup here this morning. We're really looking forward to our discussions. We've got a big agenda to cover here today, so we are going to be moving through quite a lot, but we view this as a great opportunity to provide grounding on much of the work and the thinking going on around how we create value, mitigate risk, and tackle food system externalities together with members and partners. After this brief welcome, we'll move into an overview of how we crack getting after the hidden costs of the global food and land use systems. We'll talk about how the dynamic risk assessment teaches us about the specific risks and opportunities in the agri-food sector. Then we'll move on to multi-capital accounting and how we've learned from members like OLAM in the work that they're doing in finance and sustainability. We'll talk about externalities and the Food Systems Summit and what we're looking forward to as we head into there. And then we'll have time for discussion and Q&A. Couple of housekeeping items for how we'll manage our time together today, which we'll get to in just a moment. As WBCSD, we're really pleased to share how we approach our work in partnership with these companies who you see on the screen in front of you, and so many important partners, many of whom are with us today as speakers. WBCSD looks at our world within the terms of economic systems and the businesses that have to lead the transformation. Therefore, we're working on the systems of circular economy, cities and mobilities, climate and energy, people, and then the two programs that are bringing this session to you today, Food and Nature and Redefining Value. We work together on what's it going to take for actual, meaningful, collective action and impact to achieve the system transformations that we know that we need. We are hosting a number of virtual events like this one today, 2 per week. And in this era of strange COVID times and working from home and none of us traveling as much as we used to, we invite you to attend as many of these as you can. They're open to all. And you can see the link here on how you can join us for any of these sessions going forward as well. It's a great way to gain insight and learning on a lot of the topics that are very relevant to how we have to transform our systems going forward. The housekeeping items I'd just like to check. Please note that the session is being recorded. We do have folks muted because, of course, that helps us control background sounds so you can all hear it. Know that we will, however, be making the slides and the recording available to you from the sessions today. And we really encourage everyone to use the chat function. The chat will be part of what is recorded as well in the public-facing chat. And everything that you put in there, we will try to respond so that we've got a good sequence of Q&A within the chat function as well. At the end, however, we do hope to have time for verbal Q&A if we have something that can't be taken care of in the chat function. We, as WBCSD, always approach everything that we do through collective action at a pre-competitive level. So we always include this antitrust statement reminder. What we're going to be discussing today, we want to be sure that we avoid any conversation that would be deemed competitively sensitive. If we hear it, we'll jump in to put an end to it quickly. If others are concerned, please let us know that we can take the appropriate actions. Now I'd like to turn it over to discuss how we handle these hidden costs of the global food and land use systems. Scarlett, over to you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Fabulous.
Loud and clear.
Great. Hi everyone, so my name is Scarlett Benson. As Diane said, I'm an associate at Systemic. I'm also the program manager of the Food and Land Use Coalition, of which both WBCSD and Systemic are members. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the report that we published last year, the Growing Better report, which looks at the externalities associated with the food system, and then to talk about what next we're doing on this topic, and specifically relating to the food systems economic mission, which we are setting up with EAT Foundation and PIC. So if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. So the Growing Better report was the report that I just mentioned that we published in September last year. And it was the first integrated global assessment of the social, economic and health benefits of the food and land use transformation. And we looked at essentially, I'm trying to understand whether there were trade-offs between environmental outcomes, health outcomes, inclusive development and food security. We proved that on a sort of systemic level, there aren't these trade-offs that people previously believed existed. And this can be achieved, this sort of better future that we described can be achieved through a systemic reform agenda, which is applied through these 10 critical transitions, which you can see in the pyramid on the right-hand side there. So you have healthy diets at the top, all the way down to gender and demography. There is an economic prize associated with these 10 transitions, which I will actually talk through in a bit more detail in a moment. This is essentially avoided damage to people and planet by 2030. And we costed up the investment associated with these transitions at 300 to 350 billion a year. That's a significant return on investment that you have there. And we also looked importantly at the business opportunities available associated with them, and they were totaling 4.5 trillion a year by 2030. So the link at the bottom of the page there takes you to the report, and we've got various sort of summaries for business and things like that. Next slide, please. So this is the sort of the graph that we show at lots of big events at Davos, etc. That is the one that people tend to take their phones out and take pictures of, because it quite neatly captures really what we're grappling here when we talk about the sort of food systems being broken. On the left-hand side, you can see the market value of the global food system at 10 trillion US dollars. And then as we move to the right, you can see these different buckets of externalities or inefficiencies associated with the food system, associated with health, environment, and then sort of economic value lost. And what we see here is essentially that we have, negative value when we compare these externalities to the market value. In terms of how we built up these different costs, essentially, as I said before, the hidden costs are basically externalities and inefficiencies. So it's a slight muddling of different economic concepts. And I'll go through the limitations of this approach on the next slide. But I think, as I said, this is just really helpful to give you an indicative view of what all of these costs add up to and the impact that we see on the system as a whole. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of how these hidden costs are going to change in the future, we, as part of the Growing Better report, we did modeling, a detailed modeling assessment with our partner, the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, or IIASA. And we modeled two scenarios. So the first scenario is where we essentially do nothing and we continue along current trends, versus the Better Future scenario, where we implement those 10 critical transitions that I showed you in the pyramid earlier. And what we can see is that if we continue along current trends, these hidden costs continue to rise. They rise up to close to 16 trillion by 2050, whereas in the Better Future scenario, they decrease to 5.4 trillion. And the difference between those two numbers is essentially what we call the economic prize, which is avoided damage to people and planet by 2030 or 2050. just kind of to give you a sense of what this actually means, you know, current trends basically locks us into a world where we cannot achieve the 1.5 degree scenario. We see continuing biodiversity loss and deforestation. We see rising deaths from malnutrition, both undernutrition and you know, overconsumption of calories and unhealthy food. It's a pretty miserable picture, I have to say. And then the better future scenario essentially allows us to achieve a whole host of benefits. So the food and land use system is contributing up to a third of mitigation for 1.5 degrees. We see a halting and a gradual reversal of biodiversity. We see restoration of fish stocks. We see elimination of undernutrition. We halve the disease burden associated with overconsumption of calories and unhealthy food. We have incomes boosted for the bottom 20% of the rural population, and we can provide over 120 million extra jobs, all at the same time as ensuring food security and improved access and affordability for all. So it really is, you know, quite a remarkable vision of a future that is technically possible if we pull a number of levers. If we go to the next slide, please. So this is where I'll just talk a little bit about the limitations of the hidden costs. I think, you know, what we were really trying to do with the analysis there was to indicate what the magnitude of these costs were, and to kind of I'd outline how the fact that these costs are hidden is essentially distorting our decision making, and that at the same time there are these essentially these limitations with the approach that we took. So we didn't adopt a strict economic definition of externalities. Instead, it's a more broadly the top sources of lost value or human and social cost related to food and land use systems. So within that mix, we have estimates of abatement costs, we have social costs, we have productivity costs, so we have lost economic value associated with, for example, you know, inefficient use of fertilizers. The kind of extent to which we could quantify those losses does vary differently across the different dimensions. So it's not a perfect picture where we've managed to quantify everything. You know, for example, as well, we drew the boundary of the food and land use system. So we didn't include, for example, hidden costs associated with plastic pollution of, you know, food packaging. So it is just one snapshot, and that you could look at this in different ways, and you could, you know, go into a lot more detail. But I think what is really important is that it does provide a reasonably reliable indicator of the order of magnitude of these hidden costs. Which is essentially, you know, what we need to do in order to shift decision making. But going from that and acknowledging all of those sort of limitations, I then want to talk about what we're doing next, which relates to the Food Systems Economics Commission. So having done the Food and Land Use Coalition Growing Better report, you know, understanding the limitations with the hidden costs. Indeed, we also had, you know, real challenges with some of the modelling that underpinned the two different scenarios. So we had to stitch together one model from IIS with a World Bank model so that we could truly understand the sort of livelihood implications of some of the shifts and the levers. So, you know, the tools that we had weren't entirely fit for purpose to be really able to understand some of the trade-offs that we need to look at. Not necessarily on a system level, but within a country or a regional context. So as I say, we are setting up this Food Systems Economic Commission with EAT and the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. And that's really building on the Growing Better report in two main ways. So we're broadening the way that we're looking at impact beyond just looking at monetary value. And then we're deepening the analysis of pathways. So we're looking, for example, in more detail at the livelihood impacts associated with the transition that we describe. If you go to the next slide. So this Food Systems Economic Commission, it was soft launched in Davos, really, and the vision is that we seek to equip leading political and economic decision makers with the evidence to swiftly advance the transition towards healthy, inclusive and sustainable food systems. We have a number of commissioners. I think there's more than 20 now, from a range of different academic backgrounds. We have the likes of Nick Stern from London School of Economics. We have Jess Fanzo from Johns Hopkins University. We have Jürgen Vogel from World Bank, Maximo Torero from FAO, Naoko Ishii from the University of Tokyo. And all of those commissions are chaired by Professor Ravi Kamba, Otmar Edenhofer, and Vera Songwe. So it's a fantastic lineup, and as I say, they are all from sort of academic backgrounds, but I'll talk on the next slide a little bit about how we will be engaging with other sort of people from other backgrounds, including the business community. So a little bit more information. Sorry, if you could just go back. Just want to quickly outline the sort of key things that we'll be looking at. So the questions that we're addressing is essentially, how do we transform food systems so that they perform well in terms of these outcomes around health, environment, and inclusion? Where do we want to go with food systems? What does the transition look like? So, for example, we're trying to identify key waypoints along the way and targets at a regional level for both 2030 and 2050. And I think important to say as well, what we're hoping to do with those targets is to establish targets for technological development, behavioural change, as well as food system organisation. And then in terms of the last piece, which is around what is preventing the sustainability transition for food systems and how can the lock-ins be addressed. Here we're looking at doing agent-based modelling to understand the different types of policy measures that can lead to effective implementation of policy, and effective outcomes, of course. And I think importantly there, we'll be doing deep dives in some of the FOLU countries. So FOLU has programs in China, India, Colombia, Ethiopia, and Indonesia. We do have some other ones, but those are where we have our sort of main programs. So we'll be working with those countries to really understand what this looks like at that country level. In terms of the timeline, as I said, we soft launched in Davos, but the first output that we'll be aiming for is around the Food Systems Summit next year. And then we'll be doing a final peer-reviewed publication, which we've secured Springer Nature for in 2023. And the next slide, which is my final slide. So I'm not going to go into detail on the two work streams, but we're splitting them up between PIC and FOLU, and of course we'll be continuing to work together. But I wanted to just draw your attention to the engagement strategy, which underpins both of these work streams. So we haven't yet established exactly how we want to engage with business and how we think best, and we're very keen to have that discussion either today or, indeed working closely with our partner WBCSD to establish how business can contribute to the Food Systems Economic Commission. But we will be participating in global events and processes. We will be really supporting the commissioners so that they're champions and going out and their relevant public and private sector engagement opportunities. We will be, as I said before, engaging with national and regional stakeholders with a particular focus in those countries that I mentioned before. And then we'll be engaging with academia through the peer-reviewed publication with Springer Nature. So very happy to answer questions, I guess most likely at the end, but yes, looking forward to discussing and really keen to get your thoughts on how we can engage with business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scarlett. I'm Rodney, and I'm delighted to be able to join you today to discuss some of the work that the Food and Nature team at WBCSD have been collaborating with us in redefining value to deliver. What Diane has been mentioning so far around the 6 economic systems that WBCSD is seeking to change requires us to think differently about the exposures and opportunities that those systems are exposed to. And one of those areas that I believe is somewhat underutilized in conversations and inputs into decision making is this concept of risk management. Risk management is a requirement in every company. Anybody that's listed, any organization that has a listing in most jurisdictions has a legal obligation to disclose what the key risks are and what the process is to identify them. The problem with having such a compliance-based strategy to risk management means that people do it because they have to, not because they necessarily see value in it. And so what we've seen over the last few years is the disclosure of risks that are so generic that they are meaningless for both decision makers inside the business as well as those outside of the organization that want to make decisions regarding that business, whether to work with it or invest in it. So the next few slides are really going to take us through some of the WBCSD's work in this space to try and change what we've seen. Now, the slide that you see in front of you here is maybe familiar to you all. This comes from the World Economic Forum's annual risk report, which is published every year, the week before Davos, and it outlines what the key impact risks are and likelihood risks are. And if you look at just the colors that you see in the slide in front of you, there's been a progression over the last 11 years from the dark blue risks of economic exposure through to the green risks of the environment. Now, many of you will be familiar with this, and you'll see it every year, and you'll think, yeah, there we go, yes, isn't sustainability getting more important? But I want to just draw your attention to this. If we look at 2009, we were just starting to experience the full impact of the economic crisis and the mis-selling of financial instruments that caused the global meltdown in 2008. But if you look at what's happened in both the likelihood and impact, we see chronic disease. So in 2009, we as a community, we as a society, already acknowledged that there was an issue. Now, for those of you that don't remember what that was the first global pandemic issued by the World Health Organization. This time it was a virus called H1N1, and it was an influenza virus that mutated from the animal kingdom to the human population. But it's the fourth, it was the second, sorry, that was the second respiratory illness that we had in this millennium. And it is also what we experience at the moment with COVID-19, the fourth respiratory illness and the second global pandemic. But look at 2020, no sign of a pandemic or of any health-related issues. And that, for me, gives an indication that the way in which we prioritize risk is fundamentally flawed. It is fundamentally flawed, not only because we don't capture the risks properly, or that we don't prioritize them properly. And there is a reason why I believe this happens, and it's personal to me. So this isn't necessarily, I'm not talking about academic studies here, but it's what I've observed over 30 years of working in risk management, is that as humans beings, we're very quick to discount anything that we don't think will happen. And that happens in business all the time. And one of the reasons why I believe risk management has become ineffective in its current format is because if we have developed a strategy, then it's really difficult for us to say, well, it's not going to happen. You know, the whole concept of behavioral economics does play a role in this. So just want you to be aware that we every year, i.e. we, the world, publish this report. This report has shown a progression towards more environmental exposure. It missed one of the biggest ones this year in terms of its top 5 likelihoods and impacts, which will have probably the biggest consequence that the world has faced in modern times. But nonetheless, we have this information, and do we act upon it? So if we go to the next slide, I just want to give you an indication that we don't. So we did this research in 2015, 2016, and we published it at Davos in early 2017, where we actually examined 170 global companies. And we looked at their sustainability risks, and we looked at their legal risks that they disclose in their annual report. And what we found that on average, there was a 1 in 3 chance that ESG-related material impact in the sustainability report would be reflected in the risk filing. that is, quite shocking when you consider that this over the last 10 years, we've seen this progression towards more sustainability related risks being considered to be the most likely and the most impactful. Now, this average of 29% alignment, when broken down, is even more worrying. Of the 170 companies, we only found that 8% of them had full alignment, 57% had partial alignment, and further analysis of that partial alignment showed that that was where there was a legal requirement to disclose. But 35% of the population had completely zero alignment between the disclosure of material ESG risks in the sustainability report and the disclosure of risks to a wider audience in the legal filing. So that got me thinking as to why is this not happening? Why are businesses not listening to those in authoritative sources around the emerging environmental and social risks? And what is the reason for this happening? And we conducted this research, as I said, as 170 companies, and we followed that up and triangulated our desktop physical research with conversations with risk management and sustainability functions in over 30 companies. And what we observed is that there was a common theme of 8 different reasons why this was happening. One is of what I've already mentioned, is that externalities. Well, what do we do with those? How do we bring them in? How do we quantify it? What language are these two departments speaking to each other? How do you quantify an ESG-related risk? It's too difficult, therefore let's not bother. So this research for us was really groundbreaking in that it allowed us to seek funding from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation to try and build a guidance document that would allow us to bridge the gap. And if we go to the next slide, I'm pleased to say that in 2018, we were able to launch this guidance in partnership with COSO. COSO is the most widely used risk management framework in the world, with over 70% of the world's largest companies using the COSO framework. And we know from our research that approximately 98% of the Forbes 100, for example, either use the COSO framework or use a framework that is COSO inspired. So the framework, which was reissued in 2017, follows the 5 chapters that you see here in our guidance. So this is quite an important document because it's a partnership document with a mainstream organization that seeks to ensure that the impacts and dependencies that business have on nature and society are considered in the governance, strategy and objective setting, performance, review and revision, and information communication and reporting processes of risk management. But if, Emily, if you could just press the button, you will see that today we're really focusing in on chapter 3B, which I would believe is one of the most important chapters in the guidance. And that is how do we assess and prioritize these types of risks such that they get the attention of the decision makers. And so the rest of the presentation is really focused on how to get you to move away from what you may be doing today on impact and likelihood and getting into a space of thinking a bit more smart about risks. But we would not have been able to do this if it wasn't for the generosity of KPMG, who came to us and said, we believe we have an approach that could bring chapter 3B to life. And of course, from our member companies, and you see all of their logos here, who give up their time to take part in this study. And I would like to just take you through the salient findings of that study now. In the next slide, what I'll show you is probably the traditional view, what you're used to in your business community, of looking at risk in a binary fashion. You look at the impact that the risk might have, and you look at the probability that the risk will happen. And for me, probability is a little bit worrying. So for example, if you have just spent years developing your corporate strategy and you believe that this is the thing that you want to go away and do, then being asked to say, well, what would prevent it from happening is not something that you're really comfortable saying, because you've just spent years saying this is what we need to do. Therefore, you need to go back and say no. So if we look at the traditional view and what we found with our members, and we, Emily, if you press the button, you'll see that the 2 biggest risks here are in social media and in regulation, i.e. the biggest issues facing the global food system, feeding 9+ billion people by 2050, is regulation and social media. Whoops, But if we look at a more sophisticated approach, which KPMG calls dynamic risk assessment, then we see completely different insights. So if we move away from this traditional view into the next slide, you can see that looking at risk through a lens that's not just binary on impact and likelihood, which brings in other ideas such as the speed with which a particular risk may happen and the connectivity of different risks, then you're into a different view of what those risks might be. So if based on the research that we did and the work that we did with the companies I've just mentioned, you can see here a number of clusters. Clusters are risks that are clustered in groups of 3 or more and which are interconnected with each other compared to the rest of the network. And if one of these risks is triggered, it's worth down if you're a betting person to put money on the fact that the others will be triggered as well. In the case, we had 2 major risk clusters in the study that we did in the food sector. And here we saw a consensus of 58% of the participants confirming that they saw these risks happening in combination. And what we see here are 2 clusters, one of inefficient production practices, land degradation and nitrogen efficiency, and a second cluster of inefficient production practices, land degradation and water. It is worth keeping in mind that we aim to take a holistic view of the industry's risk universe, and despite that, the sustainability risks were called out as the major clusters. So no sign here of social media. If we go to the second insight in the next slide, here we see the real valuable slide, if you like. And here we see the rank ordering of the most influential risks, that these are the risks that are most interconnected with the rest of the network. So what this means is that should something happen with them, either positively or negatively, we will see the effect or the ripples travel through the rest of the network. That also means that these are our biggest levers to impact these risks facing in the industry. So these are the risks that we need to go away and really consider management strategies for. For us, the levers of the risks were understanding agricultural practices, secondly, regulation, and thirdly, inefficiency in production practices. And just as you know, we looked at the raw data, and the first one, such as I said here, understanding agricultural practices, was by far more influential than the other 2. If we look at the third insight, here we see the flip side of the most influential risks is the most influenced. Are the risks most likely to be triggered by the others being triggered? When you think of these risks, it's maybe best to imagine a network similar to, let's say, the London Underground system. And for anybody that's had the misfortune of having to travel on that at rush hour will know that if there's a problem in a major train station in London where many lines connect, so let's say Bank, or Charing Cross, or anywhere where there is multiple lines connecting, if one of those trains has a problem, then it just becomes a hot mess of insanity. So to be avoided at all costs. Well, it's similar in this process here. So what happens is when these risks become connected because of their connectivity, the combination of inefficient practices, ill-conceived regulation, land degradation can result in what is known as a killer blow. And finally, the fourth insight is the velocity with which risks may actually happen. The fourth insight—
Just a very quick time check for
yes,
you on this important information.
On my last slide. So
Perfect.
The dotted line marks here is the average velocity of 28 months. In line with the previous engagements, we have performed a social media as the quickest check, and the fact check is that under 12 months in this case, the longest trail risk is demographics, and aging farmers, the average velocity of the network is 28 months. So when presented to the group who participated in this study, you can see that the speed with which this will happen is relatively quick, within a maximum of 28 months. So in very quick summary in the next slide, basically, if you're looking at risks, only looking at impact and likelihood, you will end up managing social media and regulation, when in reality, the problems relate to water, inefficient production practice, nitrogen and inefficiency. And so the study encourages business to divorce themselves from this binary view of risk and to look at risk in a much more complex way. And I would encourage you to look at the study, which you can get on the next slides, at wbcsd.org, which show that if you do not break away from your risk management practices, you will end up managing risks that are not material to the business and will lead us to the wrong outcomes. So encourage you to have a look at the study and contact any of us at Redefining Value or Food and Nature if you would like support in implementing this process.
Thanks so much, Rodney, for providing that overview of the dynamic risk assessment work. And I would certainly encourage everybody to check that out on the previous slide, which we will make these available in the coming days. So my name is Emily Grady, and I work with our Food and Nature team on a project called Fresh. I'm going to share a little bit about our true value of food work, and then I will hand the floor over to our colleagues from OLAM, who will be able to dive in further to some examples about how OLAM has approached multi-capital accounting. So within our project at WBCSD on the true value of food, we look at helping companies measure and value their impacts and dependencies. We think this better measurement and valuation can help inform internal decision-making as well as investor decision-making. And down the road can also provide important proof points for policymakers that are looking to tackle this question of externalities. Now within our project, we have several pieces of work that touch on knowledge sharing, standard setting, coalitions and partnerships, and advocacy. And I would highlight here that we work very closely with a number of other organizations in this space and seek to advance this work together. With regard to knowledge sharing, one of the things that we like to focus on is just encouraging companies that are fully embracing the work of impact valuation to help share their best practices, learnings, challenges with companies that are just at the beginning of that journey. So we try to facilitate that. We encourage companies to use existing standards such as the Natural Capital Protocol and the Social and Human Capital Protocol to organize their impact valuation work. But we're also really excited to be collaborating with the Capitals Coalition on the Team Agrifood Guidelines for Business, which will be a very specific methodology that builds on the two existing protocols for food and agriculture sector companies looking to do multi-capital accounting. And that piece of work is underway. In addition, we work with the Food System Impact Valuation Initiative housed at the University of Oxford. They focus on improving impact valuation methodologies for and true cost accounting for the food system. They also will be coming out in the next few weeks with a report that looks at developing comparable and practical monetary valuation approaches for food systems actors. And so keep an eye out for that. This year, we're focused on the development of impact pathways with that piece of work. Also within standard setting, we are working on developing environmental generally accepted accounting principles. And this is work that is really focused on natural capital-based environmental accounting, reporting, and standard setting, which we've identified a need for more of a generalizable standard that can help with an accounting methodology that integrates both the perspective on social and environmental issues. Now, this piece of work also sits within our Redefining Value program and a project called Assess and Manage Performance, which also has a few other areas of focus. So there's a look at intangibles. So how do we broadly understand the value of business as well as integrated performance management? So we'd be happy to help plug anyone into these pieces of work as well. Now, last year, within our True Value of Food project, we convened one food systems dialogue for investors to bring sort of the investor community and companies together around the table related to this topic of impact valuation and multi-capital accounting. And we were encouraged to host a few more of those. And this year we'll hold 3 in different geographies around the world to look at how multi-capital accounting can inform investor decision-making. Also within sort of coalitions and partnerships, We support the Global Alliance for the Future of Foods, True Cost Accounting Accelerator, and there's some additional work happening there to try to harmonize best practices and methodologies, really driving towards greater convergence. And then I think the last thing I'll say here is that within this work, we do see that impact valuation is an incredibly important lever for driving the food system transformation. And we see the Food System Summit that's coming up next year as a really important milestone to bring this work sort of to the world at large and ensure that we are together figuring out how to best tackle food systems externalities. So on the next slide, I just want to highlight the companies that have really stepped up to lead this work. Nestle, Olam, Syngenta, and Yara have really helped shape the direction of travel for the work that we do here. And all of the other companies listed on this slide are actively engaged in the work that we do within the true value of food. And so with that, I'd like to hand over to Ravi Abhiwardana from Olam, who is one of our co-leaders, and will be able to provide some context around how Olam has tackled the question of multi-capital accounting and used it to inform internal decision-making and have some practical applications to share. So Ravi, over to you.
Hello everyone. In fact, I'm going to pass the buck on to Ria Bakshi, who will start this off, and then I'll follow up. So thank you ever so much, Emily.
Hello everyone, good morning or good afternoon. Thank you WBSD for inviting us on this sharing session. Myself, Ria Bakshi, I'm a Master's in Environment and Development Management, working in Finance for Sustainability team, a newly set up team in Olam, with the main objective being embedding multi-capital accounting in the business function for all our business units. Next slide, please. A quick presentation outline. So we'll start with a brief context, a background, how it all started in Olam and setting up a Finance for Sustainability team. Then our very own decision-making tool called IIS, Integrated Impact Statement. And also we will be sharing some of the results of natural capital accounting, which we recently published in our annual report in 2019, and our way forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. I believe everybody knows about Olam, but Olam is a leading agri business operating across the value chain in more than 60 countries. And here what you see is our strategic plan for 2019 to 2024, where you can see the 4 key trends. And very important for F4S is the right for planet and right for producer trend. And our strategic priorities and enablers, where sustainability, as you can see, is the key enabler which help us drive more informed and better choices. So this was just an overview of our priorities. Next slide, please, Emily. Right. So this is an important slide which we wanted to put from a Finance for Sustainability F4S department, which is set up in the finance function, where we kind of also look into the investors' preferences, which are changing, and how it's not just the financial performance, but also the value drivers, which actually supports the financial capital or the financial performance of any company, not just being an agri kind of a business, but any business, how the need for evaluating non-financial ESG metrics, the alternative metrics, is important, and how the externalities cannot be just ignored, because these are some of the growth drivers which investors are also seeing. Like in the first on the donut, which you can see, 78% of the investors, they see risk management as a growth driver behind sustainable investing. Similarly, some others they see as revenue returns, very straightforward, as a growth driver between any sustainable investing. So as and when the sustainable investing, sustainable finance is growing up, the emergence and the new ESG metrics and their reporting as well as their quantification also needs to be even more made effective. On the right, you can see is a graph. There's a chart which shows the performance. It's basically the monthly returns of global 100 most sustainable companies across and benchmarked with Morgan Stanley's all countries world index. So it just shows, and basically if you sell these selected 100 most companies, which you people may know, there is a mirror, there's a completely a mirror image and equally weighted with the other all countries' companies. And if we see here how the global 100 most sustainable companies gave investors a 163% total return. So I don't think this is any new thing, but we all know that investors, they are getting more and more they're getting more and more influenced with not just the financial performance, but also the social performance, the performance on the other capitals, be it human capital and of course the natural capital. Next slide, please, Emily. For Olam to create value over the long term, we need to go through, not just the financial capital. We also need to see which are those drivers which make our business more sustainable in the longer term. So what you see here as a visible value is our market capitalization, but there is a lot of invisible non-reported value, which we are trying to ascertain here as part of F4S team. So this can be financial, social capital, manufactured capital, but the ones which are colored, social capital, human capital, natural capital, what we are trying to do is to embed the methodologies under each of these and how we are making an impact. So under social capital, be it our work with the communities, with the farmer groups, be it on the living income or doing more for the children's education, eradicating child labor, be it the human capital accounting, which is the biggest asset we think in Olam is the human resources. And the most important, the natural capital and what is other dependencies. So we are trying what is the best and the most effective way to communicate this. Next slide, Emily. So the key question which in Olam, which we hear most often is that can we establish this financial link to sustainability? Whatever our actions are on ground on sustainability, be it across all those capitals, can we establish that link? Because the ultimate aim is that in all our financial decisions, we'll be able to account for these non-financial matters. So the answer was yes, we can. And F4S was then set up, and we are set to do this through our IIS, the Integrated Impact Statement, which has those three, the elements which help not just like we, evaluate the financial capital, the financial metrics. Can we similarly do this for our natural capital drivers, be it land, our impact on water consumption, be it our positive or negative impact? Can we also do that similarly like we do with financial statements? So IIS was one of the product. Later on, we'll also explain you what are the components of IIS. Similar, it's very similar like on P&L account or a balance sheet. And of course, the most important being the risk and opportunity statements. So because it's a decision-making tool, integrated impact statement. So whatever numbers which are coming up, it should help us make a decision. So that was the important aspect which we wanted to highlight here, that there is a financial link and there is a tool which we are developing here at Olam. Next slide, please, Emily. So yes, we have this tool now ready, and we have also published our natural capital accounting results from a profit and loss perspective right now, which shows an annual changes when it comes to water consumption or social cost of carbon or impact on water pollution or ecosystem services. So it helps us, uncover all these hidden costs and benefits, which you never know will materialize when and where. So like social cost of carbon or carbon tax was something which, we have seen it, now expanding across the world geographies. Recently in Singapore also, we have seen a carbon tax coming up. So similarly, we want to just identify what are those hidden, not only costs, but also the benefits, the benefits to biodiversity or ecosystem services, which is kind of materializing because of our actions on ground. And so that we are ready, our business is future proof. So that's one of the key components we always keep in mind. Second, dependencies. So as I said, there's a balance sheet approach also. So we need to know we are dependent on natural capital, and there is a boundary, the planetary boundaries which we need to operate in. Similarly for human capital and from social capital. Third, the risk and opportunities to Olam. So nowadays we are seeing how, the TCFD, biodiversity risk, climate change risk, and the financial implications because of these risks, the disclosures of these risks are becoming more and more prominent. Even governments are, putting a lot of impetus on, we need to really, companies need to disclose on their climate-related risk, biodiversity and nature-related risk. So risk and opportunities is one of the key component of the integrated impact statement, which is very important and makes it very relevant for Olam. And third, and the last one is the ESG metrics that we really need to have, alternative metrics to actually define and convey our long-term value to our investors, to our financiers, and to all our stakeholders. And so these are the 4 key relevant the impedance, the drivers. Next slide, please. I think I'm just covering the next slide also. Yes. So based on all these drivers, we have F4S set up, Finance for Sustainability. So I'll just give you 3 drivers why this was set up. Next slide, Emily, please. Yeah, so these are the 3 drivers. So why we thought, multi-capital accounting as well as IIS, why it needs to be embedded in finance function, and what are the drivers behind. So one is internalization of externalities. Okay, we know these are the externalities across different capitals, but are we internalizing it? How are we doing it at different BU levels or different business segments level? Second, most important is accountants' culture and the mindset that's just whether there is a financial implication. It's just not the ROI, the financial ROI. We also need to see the environmental and social returns on investment at the same time when we are taking any financial decision. And third, most important, why we think finance for sustainability and the finance function, we need to really build upon this project is the common financial currency, because we need to speak a language which is common and people can easily compare through methodologies. And we have also put in here our F4S vision to be best-in-class business partner responsible for maximizing long-term intrinsic value for all our stakeholders within Olam's business units using non-financial drivers of value. So I will now ask my colleague Ravi to take you to the results which we have published in our annual report for Cocoa Business Unit. Thank you.
Thanks, Ria. Yeah, thank you. So my name is Ravi Abhiwardana. I'm a manager within the Finance for Sustainability department within Olam, and I'm a chartered accountant with ICAEW. So on this slide, it's an introduction to the Integrated Impact Statement, which is also known as the IIS. And the IIS will provide our 12 business units with visibility on those hidden impacts and dependencies on 3 key capitals. And it will allow my finance colleagues to really manage a broader set of drivers beyond finance. Next slide, please. Great. The Integrated Impact Statement was developed internally and externally audited. And it was developed via an internal task force a few years ago, which included risk, human resources, finance and sustainability department, and was chaired by Rishi Kalra, the group CFO. And the whole purpose of this IIS is to facilitate and support decision-making so as to protect our business and ensure reliability of sourcing going forward. As Ria had mentioned, the IIS is a pioneering tool and covers statements such as the profit and loss and balance sheet in an easy to understand format, and uncover those hidden impacts and allow us to enhance our accountability and stewardship on those non-financial capitals to really promote an understanding of interdependencies between the different capitals and really uncover those risks and opportunities. What you have here is the Integrated Impact Statement, and it's a 3-step approach. What you have in front of you is step 1. So as per normal IFRS, certain line items are deemed as costs when related to the different capitals. Here we deem them as direct contributions to those capitals. So how much have we actually paid over and above minimum wage, for example, and how much have we invested within the environment? The second element, step 2, is split between 2 capitals. Split between the profit and loss and the balance sheet. And they very much uncover the hidden costs and benefits from externality reporting. Next slide, please. And here is further details of the balance sheet, which details our dependencies and our thresholds against the planetary boundaries. And the third step is a risk and opportunity statement, which details our internalisation of externalities. Over the next 3 slides, I'm going to focus on the integrated impact statement, natural capital, profit and loss 2019 insights, which are detailed on our website and our annual report, and very much uncover the hidden costs and benefits. This slide very much focuses on greenhouse gases and natural capital costs associated with select cocoa farmer groups. And it provides our cocoa business units with a clear understanding of the impacts which our business decisions have on our environment, but also provides them with the capacity to reduce those impacts on natural capital. One way of doing this is to increase our planned level of agroforestry for certain farmer groups. And you'll notice that farmer group 11 is producing an overall net loss of 650 greenhouse gases, and this can very much be mitigated via tree planting initiatives across our 185 farm group operations in Côte d'Ivoire. Next slide, please. This slide is to do with water consumption, and what we have here is the hidden costs associated with water consumption. Water consumption from a processing facility has impacts on both the environment but also the individuals too, because water which is taken out of the environment can lead to water scarcity for human beings. In the previous slide, we used a global number for greenhouse gases, but from a water perspective, we use GPS location, watershed specific valuation factors, because each and every watershed is very different. And what you have here is 2 processing facilities where they're taking water out of the environment. However, they have different ecosystem impacts as well as health impacts. Moving on to the next slide, please. This slide is to do with natural capital, cropland, ecosystem services, and this is a benefit. What you see here is that Night Farmer Group is the most productive per $1 million of ecosystem cropland services. And once again, these are really important. Ecosystem services is very important to Olam. In 2018, we required the services of 2.5 billion bees, costing our business $8.5 million to pollinate our almond estates. And these are very much hidden benefits from the environment, which we are uncovering via the integrated impact statement. Next slide, please. So this initiative is is a key subject area for Rishi Kalra, the Group CFO of Olam Food Ingredients, and from his perspective, there's a need for a numerical link between the actions on the ground and their impact and dependency on the capitals and Olam's relationships with that. Just handing over to Ria just to wrap this up with regards to the way forward.
Yeah. Next slide, please, Emily. Thank you, Ravi. Fantastic. I think we are really proud of the work we have done on natural capital accounting. But right now, the most important for us is to scale this up in Olam. Scale natural capital accounting to all business units. Right now, Ravi showed you for the cocoa business units. And to build awareness how finance functions can actually use this, these numbers, these externalities before making their their decisions, and working with different origins on when they develop their agroforestry plans with farmer groups, what needs more investment in which program. So that kind of insights. And So we will also further disclose our details on human and social capital accounting, which is again key for our for embedding multi-capital accounting. ULAM, very key to these two capitals, which we have started to again scale up in ULAM. Third is very important, since this is something not new, but something new in implementation. We would love to, socialize more on our approaches, make things lot transparent, so that there's a more of comparability against numbers and some uniformity in the methodologies. So more, I think, collaboration with WBCSD, with TEEB, with National Capital Coalitions and similar, and also participate in more summits to gain more knowledge with other people who are working in this domain. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ria and Ravi, for this overview of what ULAM is doing on an integrated impact statement and insights you're gathering. It actually provides a great introduction to this section on externalities and the Food System Summit. So my name is Clea Kaske-Cook. I'm Director for Policy and Advocacy at WBCSD. And what I will be presenting is a brief update on the Food System Summit from a WBCSD perspective, although Martin Frick will be providing much more background and context on this later. And then I will focus a little bit on some of the policy perspective on externalities. So WBCSD is happy to be working together with its members and partners in support of the Food System Summit, in particular to help define the role of the private sector in helping transform our food systems to be more sustainable and resilient. We are planning to help elevate the voice of the private sector, to share what kind of commitments business can make to help us achieve the SDGs, but also what kind of structures and changes need to happen on a policy level to make this change feasible and impactful on a large scale. There are going to be other food and nature related events happening later this year and next year, many in anticipation of next year's Food System Summit. So we are really excited to see so much action and interest from the private sector. If you're interested more into learning more about WBCSD's role in this, please do let me know. What I wanted to focus on is also that companies are increasingly looking at incorporating holistic environmental, social, and governance performance and review into the regular enterprise risk management, which is a great evolution, although to Rodney's earlier points, not happening enough. We are nonetheless happy to see this progress, especially as this is a key step in helping transform food systems and will be a good pathway into the UN Food System Summit next year. One of the key additional benefits of engaging in this work and understanding more about the hidden costs of our global food and land use systems is that it can help companies anticipate legislative developments and changes and adapt their business strategy accordingly. Creating a positive financial link to sustainability is an impressive accomplishment and aligns business profit with positive impact. An additional benefit of engagement around external risk links to increasing business understanding of how other stakeholders, in particular policymakers, civil society, and ultimately government decision makers, will try to create legislation that addresses some of the underlying negative issues surrounding our current food and land use system, and ultimately help anticipate legislative developments and position positively. This understanding can be a key driver for strategic decision-making, such as in investments, for example, ensuring long-term license to operate, and also help drive strategic external engagement from a policy perspective. So external engagement surrounding externalities and ESG risk can help drive business decision-making around long-term investment decisions that would need capital spend, for example, on plant building and infrastructure investments, but can also influence short-term decisions and identify new collaboration opportunities, for example, working with farmers and crop rotations. Finally, being aware of positive legislative developments can help business voice its concerns and hopes around pending changes. For example, how they could impact local employment and production patterns, and the importance of taking a systems perspective and understand unintended consequences of possible legislative changes. These are just some brief ideas that I wanted to share about some of the policy implications and opportunities linked to doing a comprehensive ESG assessment, and also a brief update on WBCSD and the Food System Summit. I wanted to take this opportunity to now also pass on to Martin Frick, Deputy Envoy for the 2021 Food System Summit. And Martin, the floor is to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you very much, everybody, for these very thoughtful introductions. I mean, if you just consider the numbers of an entire industry that is producing 2 trillion more damage than it's actually creating value, it's quite mind-boggling. And I think all of us are now under the impression of the COVID crisis. And obviously, I'm talking to you out of my son's bedroom, which is a bit unusual. But what COVID really does is showing us the interdependencies of the world we have created for ourselves, the risks, the vulnerabilities, and really how everything affects basically everything. Just now, a group of almost 40 million healthcare workers worldwide rallied around a letter that was sent to the G20 leaders asking for certain conditions in the COVID recovery. And if you look at this letter, it's online, some of the key issues are really around the food systems. Before I have joined now the team, I was 2.5 years the senior director at UNFCCC, the Climate Change Convention. And even without the summit, it became for me clearer and clearer and clearer that the food systems are in climate change really the elephant in the room. We are roughly looking at 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions being produced by the way we are producing food. We are wasting 1/3 of the food that is being produced, while food production is an energy intensive business. So we are also throwing 30% of our food energy, of our food related energy away without any value created. Now, let me say quickly something about the Food System Summit, because it's an unusual thing. You, of course, know that countries, leaders and countries can request all sorts of international conferences, but there's also the possibility for the Secretary General of the United Nations to call upon a summit on issues of particular importance. And many of you will have followed the special summit that the Secretary General has organized last year in New York around climate change. And this summit, the Food System Summit that we are going to organize now, is following the same logic. It's put on the agenda by the Secretary General himself for the very good reason that if I already spoke about the climate agenda, but it's there and also in the sustainable development agenda that food systems are absolutely central, but they haven't been looked at for a long time as systems. So what does that mean? Basically, if you are looking at from a government perspective, you got a whole set of different ministers and ministries offline who are sharing responsible for a food system, but often work in silos. So you would have the Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Transport, Minister of Health, Minister of Environment, Minister of Economic Cooperation, and so on and so forth. By convening a summit on leaders level, we really have the potential to bring this up to the highest level of political decision making worldwide. Now, I've seen in the running order of today that this session now is framed as a top-down approach, but I think that is only 50% of the truth here, because we want to engage over the next 2 years in really an unprecedented way with stakeholders all over the planet, with the private sector being a prime target for us to work with. Because obviously this is what makes the world tick. This is where the value is being created. And it's very heartening to see so much readiness from the private sector to look at the question of externalities that have been ignored for too long. And I can only thank the World Business Council for Sustainable Development for their leadership there. So we want to engage with you over the next 2 years. I see this webinar also as the beginning of a very intensive cooperation process that will certainly not end, excuse me, that will certainly not end when we are coming to the summit in late 2021. But as we are looking into transforming our food systems, and pricing in the externalities is one really of these pivot points that we need in order to do so, then our work only starts by 2021 when we are coming to the summit. So I would really very much like to invite you to engage with us, to give us your view of what a summit can be do and how we are in this triangle between research and knowledge, between private sector action and policy work on a top level can really support you in your efforts to transforming what your companies do, and also help us to come on a political level to the decisions and to the conclusions we need. I very much enjoyed Rodney's session about risk management. I wanted to add one point to that of course political decision makers are always reluctant to take decisions or to take a direction that might not be in line with business. But in order to de-risk this political decision making, it's most helpful if we can come to the summit and say, look, here's a whole array of world-renowned companies that would be ready to price in their externalities, that would be interested in having a level playing field. And so we are all in this together, and we can really, with this summit, attack one of the key areas of human life and on human interfacing with nature, and live up to the interdependencies I mentioned at the outset. I'll leave it at this point, and I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Martin, thank you so much. Clea, thank you so much. Ravi and Ria and all of our speakers. I think the content here has been so rich. It was so quiet in the chat in the beginning that I wondered if people were slightly overwhelmed by all of the great information that was being shared. But Martin, I think the build that you just made on Rodney's comments relative to how we assess risk was a really important one. And how we bring all of this to life, and much more importantly, to urgent action, I think is what we really want to use these sessions to think through as well. We have a really unique opportunity in time that the Food System Summit will represent next year. But as Martin and Clea both said, it's a moment, it's a big one, it's a crescendo, but we need this work to accelerate to and through all of that. I'd like to now facilitate a bit more of our Q&A. We've had some great conversation now, really with many questions for Olam in the chat. Hopefully you saw that Ravi responded to those. More information coming from Olam as they continue their experience implementing these assessment of externalities. I found the pollination part particularly fascinating, I have to say. Other questions that we can take at this point, please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to and unmute and come in. It is great to put your questions into the chat. I have been watching them and I will bring those forward. But with so many people on the line, I would imagine there's a few other questions that you have or comments regarding what has been shared here. And while we still have our speakers with us in person, it would be, of course, great to acknowledge that. Louise, thank you for your question about how can the findings that Rodney shared on the dynamic risk assessment be included in a multi-capital assessment of impacts and dependencies? And is there a methodology that already exists? And thanks, of course, for including the tea bag for food information, because that's a very critical part, including our partnership with Capital Coalitions through our work here together. So Rodney, perhaps you can come on and address the question that we have here regarding the methodology and how to include risks, these assessment and multi-capital assessments?
Absolutely. So again, I would encourage anybody that's interested in exploring other options other than impact and likelihood to refer to Chapter 3B of the WBCSD guidance, which perhaps we could add to the communication after the when we send the recordings.
Great point, Rodney. We can include that.
So Chapter 3B provides a number of different ideas for companies to reimagine risk, not just being impact and likelihood, but other aspects. One of those aspects is the methodology that has been developed by KPMG. So what we used in this study was the KPMG methodology, which they call dynamic risk assessment. And that is a service offering that KPMG do offer to clients. But there are other options out there that if that isn't an option for you to procure the services of KPMG, there are other things that you can look at. And that's included in Chapter 3B. Very simply, the work of Rick Funston of Funston Advisory, he published a book in 2008 called The Risk Intelligent Organization, which advocates very simple shift away from probability into vulnerability and velocity. And I've personally used that in my previous life and found that it brought so much richness to conversations about risk. And at the end of the day, the most important thing about risk management isn't the methodology you use, but the vehicle through which you can encourage honest, transparent, and meaningful conversations. Because risk management is nothing more than good conversation. And unfortunately, we tend not to have very good conversations when it comes to risks and particularly the downside of risk. But yes, it is available, but there are other options, and you should refer to Chapter 3.2 in the guidance. And the whole point of risk management and why we need to change stems from the historic problems in the actual discipline. If we look at COSO's original framework, which was developed in 2004, the starting point for risk management practitioners was to look inside the business. And everything that we've heard today from Olam and from all of the other speakers starts with, not just looking inside, but also acknowledging that a business operates within context and within an ecosystem. And therefore these externalities, which, I think we need to even start thinking about whether that term is appropriate, because if COVID has taught us anything, that these externalities quickly become internalities and major problems. So the operating environment is vital, and looking beyond what you think you are responsible for is vital. And that's covered in Chapter 3.1. But my main message today is to, forget impact likelihood. It's so last season. Really need to get up with the young kids and start looking at something different, because it will be so much better for you.
That's a great message, Rodney. Thank you. And I love the delivery. We have to get hip to the times. It's very challenging times indeed. That's good. I've been keeping an eye on the chat. I haven't seen any other questions come in. Ria, thank you for adding on the Olam responses within the chat. The chat thread will be shared as well, so you all will be able to keep record of these when we share the meeting materials, as well as the document that Rodney was referencing.
And maybe Diane, if I could just interact again, for WBCSD
Please.
members who are interested in learning more about this approach, about the guidance in particular, we are currently able to offer our members a free online, because we're not likely to be able to do face-to-face anytime soon, but we're able to offer online training on how to implement the guidance in your organization. This is an accredited CPD course that takes about half a day, and it can be delivered by staff at WBCSD or through one of our three partners, EY, ERM, or PwC. So, if you are interested and can make this happen, then we would love to hear from you. So please get in touch.
Diane, Martin here, if I can
Yes.
react to one thing. I really liked what Rodney just said about the young people and the young generation. And what I encounter really is that this generation that's now going into jobs is really equipped with a totally different understanding of the interdependencies between nature as companies' responsibility and so on. And I would argue that one of the key things really to get talented young people these days is to show a track record of being an environmentally responsible company. And if I can just throw one idea is, we will be hosting over the next 2 years a whole series of food systems dialogues where we are inviting different regions, different stakeholders to do that. Maybe there is something to be done inside the enterprises to go into such a dialogue with your younger employees and asking them for their opinion and getting them fired up to be a part of this discussion and this broader conversation. Thanks.
Martin, that's such a good addition and a really critically important point, something that many of us are really trying to keep at the center of hiring strategies as well as business strategies. That's good. Thank you. Who else would like to come in with a question or a chat? We've got just a few more minutes here in which we can take a few more comments. We'll be sharing more information about the work that was referenced here today as part of our follow-up for next steps for all those who have participated and registered. And what we're really seeing here is a theme of the importance of incorporating a broader assessment of risk and financial accountability into the work that we're doing. We want to continue to have this be an ongoing discussion and dialogue. Martin, thank you. I see that you've just noted that you want to continue to be part of the ongoing conversation as well. Thanks for adding your Twitter handle there. And it's going to be a really big moment for us to bring the actions that companies like Olam and others are doing to the Food Systems Summit. We at WBCSD, together with partners like FOLU, will be helping to demonstrate what that kind of level of company engagement and action can demonstrate relative to shifting how financial performance is assessed and considered. And these are important tools to be able to do that. Just giving another moment here to see if any other questions or comments come up. Checking, and I don't see any hands raised. What I'd like to do then is take a minute to truly thank everyone who participated as a speaker here. Scarlett, great overview of the Growing Better report and what it pointed out relative to the food system operating actually at a loss and why this incorporation of externalities is so important. Rodney, your point around the fact that we were simply unprepared in a risk-based planning scenario for the scale of pandemic that we're facing right now, but really we should not have been. And the use of the dynamic risk assessment approach helps us really look at these things and take into consideration how we have to be prepared going forward in a very different way. Emily, Ria, and Ravi, thank you so much for your overviews on the true value of food work and the way Olam has brought that to life in its own organization and how you're operationalizing that. Ravi, thank you for sharing the website on where we can get more information on that. We'll include that as part of our follow-up as well. And then Clea and Martin, great summary for us, giving us these key moments that we need to be thinking about relative to how we articulate the work that business is demonstrating, as well as when we can start to show these results in future events, especially the Food Systems Summit. So all, thank you so much for participating here today. It's been a pleasure having you. Look forward to the email with the follow-up to the meeting event, and we look forward to continued working together and partnering. Take care all.